polio in 1949 when he was just a year and a half while he was living in London. And then he spent about 3 years in the hospital. He has moved around the world with a father who has served in the British Army. He was schooled in the UK and started work in 1967 for Unilever in their shipping line. They put him through university and he qualified as a naval architect and marine surveyor. He moved to Cunard, where he worked both onshore as well as on board the QE2. I was very interested in that little piece of information. And he's been married for 51 years to his wife, Mary, and is retired from at the British Steel Corporation as the commercial director, and that's John. Nilesh comes to us as the IT officer of the National Resource Center for Inclusion in India. He has a master's degree in English from the University of Bombay, has a PG certificate in human rights, and also a PG certificate in Novell Certified Internet Professional, or NCIP as they call it. He's worked for over 20 years in the field of disability and has a special focus on accessibility, inclusive design, disability law, UN CRPD, and DEI trainings. Nilesh was part of a team at the NLASAR University of Law, appointed by the government of India to draft the 2016 Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, and the first country to report to the United Nations Convention of Persons with Disabilities. And Anita comes to us as the dyslexia practitioner in training with the Orthon Gilliam Academy and founder of the Anima Dyslexia Center in Kaduna, Nigeria. She advocates for people living with disabilities and is the secretary of the International Rotary World Disabilities Advocacy Club. So quite the credentials in that group. And I am really excited to ask them a couple of questions on behalf of all of you, and then also open it up to all of you. So we chose for this panel to do more of just a roundtable discussion versus formal presentations, just because I think just because we're on this world stage and getting so many different views, I thought that would be more interesting. So John, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in this space right now?
I'm covering a very large area because I look at employment for people with disabilities, all types of disabilities, and how they can be actually integrated into employment law. Now, unlike some of the other places, that means that I'm dealing with 27 countries because of the EU, and 28 if you include the UK into it. And we have to integrate all the directives and the legal representation which is needed for persons with disabilities to actually work in the workplace, to give them equal opportunity, not just equal opportunity in access into the workplace and making reasonable adjustment, but equal opportunity in promotion and how they can be promoted. Now, this is extremely difficult because inside of the Europe, and also inside a lot of the other countries which are included in the 42 members of the Council of Europe. So that's the 27 EU states plus another 15. So that's people like Greenland, Iceland, Liechtenstein and such like. We land up with some of those countries, including disability law, disability rights, not falling within an actual legal framework. It falls within what's called the social chapter. And the social chapter turns around and says that EU directive law does not apply where people say it's going to be in the social chapter. So we get problems. For example, in Greece, we land up with a situation where it is disability and disability in employment is counted in the social chapter. So they can actually turn around and say, well, we can disregard that part of the directive saying that people must have the same rights to employment if they're disabled or not. We also land up with a situation whereby in France they have in law a quota which says 3% of a workforce will be classified as disabled or in the disability categories. put that into the social chapter, and they put a clause in which says that you are in a situation where you do not need to actually have 3% of your workforce in the disability sector. What you can do is you can pay a fine, and that fine, so much, will be put towards the education of disabled people and disabled adults. So France has the most highly educated disabled population in the whole of the EU, and the lowest proportion of people actually employed in the EU in the disabled field. The overall disability unemployment rate inside of the EU is 49.7%. So of employable age, 49, call it 50% of those people who are have got a disability, are unemployed, and are usually in low-paid jobs and are going through. And what we've been trying to do for donkey's years is to actually get it brought into an equal stature, whereby people are recognized not by their disability, because this is where we go into the social side of it, we go into the not recognized by their disability, but their ability. And I've been working, and actually after I came out of British Steel, I actually went to start to work completely in the disability sector. And I helped to draw up the laws for the EU about disabled and employment. I did the Disability Employment Act, the Disabled Discrimination Act for UK and Ireland and various other states. I also back in the late 80s, I also actually got called in to help with the ADA as well. So it goes back a long way. What we're trying to do is to make things an equal playing field. Now, when Dr. Bowtie was talking, he was talking about, you had fences and all sorts of things. One of the other problems is that it's not just getting into a place, it's actually getting accessible. And 9 times out of 10, what stops people from working and having access is the accessible built environment does not exist. Excuse the squeak in the background, is my West Highland Terrier. So it goes from there. That's how it works.
Great. And see Anita has joined us, so great. That's fantastic. Nice to see you. So, Anita, we're going to go to you next. I'm just asking the question of what's the work that you're doing in the space right now? If you can give us a quick synopsis of what you're doing.
And I work out of Nigeria. The measure of dyslexia, and because of that, we just focus and also talking to government. I just came off from a meeting. And yeah, it was one of those shocking meetings that you find people who are policymakers have no idea what this is.
So Anita, we're having a hard time hearing you because you're breaking up.
So after we create advocacy, and now that I know what do I do, where should I go to? Okay, I can just come closer. So I was saying that because of we create awareness, and then we also train teachers, and because even the teachers we train would still have a hard time trying to implement all the things that we are training them on. So we had to create a model center, and in the center at the moment, so what we do is we take on children who have profound dyslexia, and then we work with them. So as we train teachers, we also bring them to the center to see the resources that we use, and then to see how we execute our solutions to the problem. So that's what we do: advocacy, teacher training, and also work with children.
And how common is dyslexia there?
Okay, so the statistics we use is actually the United States statistics, because again, it is relatively unknown. So there hasn't been much research done about dyslexia. But what we also do alongside the training that we give is we ask teachers, we give teachers like a checklist and say, have you noticed this in your classroom? And how many can you pinpoint in your classroom? So on an average, it is going by the United States statistics again, that 2 in every 10 children. And then another thing that might interest you is when we started, that was in 2018, we took a survey to ask teachers if they have heard of the word dyslexia. It was just a short paragraph that we sent out and said, in the paragraph, we made sure that dyslexia is the only grammar, it's the only big word in the short sentence, just about 3 lines story. So we said, cycle the new word in the paragraph. And then we sent out about 200 surveys, and 198 of these surveys came back, and these are from teachers in higher schools. So it is really an unknown condition.
Interesting. Okay, let's I want to go to and I still am not getting this right, and I apologize. Nilesh, can you tell us what's happening in your space?
I have kept my camera off because my connection is a bit slow. Yes, I mean, my background is I've been working on, like you mentioned, disability law. So basically, I did not mention was I was involved in a lot of public interest litigations. Some of them have got some wonderful orders from both the High Court in Bombay and the Supreme Court in India. So, like nearly 15 years I've been kind of doing that. And now I've kind of thought that I should kind of change track. And I've been trying to get into the DEI space. And I'm actually finding it very difficult to get work. Wherever I send my resume, I get this thing is, oh, wonderful, you've got, very impressive. But then, somehow, 2 things that kind of make it difficult for me to get work. One is my disability. I've got cerebral palsy, quadriplegia. So mobility is an issue. And recently, just before the pandemic, and in fact, I've been very lucky. I was supposed to fly to United States where my brother stays for, just visiting him in February 2020. And I just kind of, got this inside information because I do some work for the government also, that India is going into lockdown. And I canceled my tickets and I was kind of very lucky. But getting back to the main point, I had interviewed it with one of a very prominent DPO in America. And I kind of cleared 3 interviews. And I was kind of hoping that I might get a work, and they were kind of going to plan some work in India and Asia and things like that. And I kind of heard, they said that, we'll get back to you. Now, get back to you after an interview simply means that they're not going to come back. You haven't got the job. So I thought, there must be something that I must have lacked in experience or something I must have said that kind of, they didn't want to, give me the work. And a few days later, just out of curiosity, I logged into their website and they had changed their profile for the job. They added this thing, mobility required per person to travel independently. I am, kind of a litigious person in my own way. So I kind of sent them just gave them a piece of my mind. I said, you're DPO, and how dare you kind of, do something like that? You are the one, what kind of impression are you giving to the world of disability? I mean, just because you're trying to say that I am a cripple and I'm useless. I mean, you didn't say it, but that is what you meant. So that is one thing that happened to me. And very recently, a prominent NGO in India, they kind of invited me to work with them. And I did some work for them. And most of the work in India, unfortunately, is pro bono. So I kind of did a lot of pro bono work. They said, we want to hire you. And I did 2 projects with them, hoping that I might get paid somewhere down the line. And they told me that, sorry, we don't have the funds. So whatever other projects I was worked on, I just quit. I said, boss, after the pandemic, my medical bills have raised exponentially. Pandemic has caused a lot of damage to me in some way. I need to pay bills. And as an organization, if you don't understand this, there's no point working in the field of disability and employment. You're just making the noise and you don't believe in what you're doing. So this same thing what the Americans did, Indians did to me the same thing. And my other problems I've been facing with getting into this world of DEI is, 2 things are happening. One, when I approach any major, MNC or company and ask them that I am capable of giving them trainings and all that, they say that, they said, okay, are you registered with any NGO? See, in India, everything works if you are part of an NGO and that is registered with the government. If you are not getting the work with, companies is very difficult. And another problem that I'm facing is there is no concept of a person with disability as a professional and an expert. I'm finding that very difficult to kind of, get into that. Like an interview now, you can't see me. So there's no way you can even make out that if I have a disability or not. So I've been kind of giving these interviews with my camera off to a lot of people. And when they hear about me, I know, just to understand. So this is something that is happening. Do I answer all your questions now or you'll be asking them later? You had listed 4 questions, right? So this is the part.
Yeah, I haven't got to the questions yet. I'm just looking at right now, just sort of what kind of work
so this is the kind of problem I am facing. It's more like I am the one who's seeking employment and it's getting very difficult. I have the experience, but I'm just not good enough for anybody now. I think the world has changed.
What's interesting to me is that the laws that you worked on, this draft, it was just in 2016. So disability rights, that sounds like it's very new in India. So that stood out to me in your profile.
One thing that happened was after I finished the law, I fell ill for some time. So I kind of got out, was out of circulation, for lack of better word. And it is like this, out of sight is out of mind. So sort of people kind of, forgot about me. And then by the time I just, got my, act together, the pandemic happened. So, then that kept another gap. So that is something that has gone against me, but that shouldn't happen. Now everything is virtual. So, getting in remote work should not be difficult, with anybody. But it's still a matter of.
So sorry, not to cut you off, but that's a great question. I think John and Anita, I didn't put this on your questions, but you just brought it up. How, in the United States, we have definitely shown that the pandemic has affected people with disabilities much greater than the general population. Have you found that in your areas as well?
Right across Europe, it's done a great disservice to people with disabilities. Because they suddenly discovered hybrid working over here, and the hybrid working is in fact allowing a lot of people to work from home. Now that should mean, therefore, that persons with disabilities should be able to work from home and then just be seen and not allowed to go on and do the things. But it's been a way I've turned around and said, with the pandemic, it's caused cutback in turnover and everything else. So therefore, instead of getting rid of people on the basis of those who are no good at their job or something like that, what they've done is they've taken the easiest option. And they've actually got rid of people who can't go in and out of the office very easily, or they've moved around and done. I can see nods coming in as well. They're going through and they're getting rid of these people, and they're getting rid of them unfairly. the problem now is inside of some of the court systems, there are so many cases being put up for unfair dismissal. And I know it's happening in the States as well, talking to people there, for unfair dismissal, or what they class as constructive dismissal. It has done a disservice, and it has not allowed people to actually show their worth. I'm going to jump in on one of the questions that you've got in here. You talk about things, and I mentioned it earlier on. What you've got to do is that what we've got to do, and what has got to be done with the businesses, is we've got to get people to recognize ability, not disability. Now, I'm going to give you one.
For those of you who don't know the question he's referring to is, I asked them, what advice do you have for businesses who might want to hire somebody with a disability but don't know where to start? So I'd ask the panelists to sort of, ponder that question.
Well, I was very fortunate. I've been disabled. In fact, I've been, since I had polio back in '49, I've actually been totally, I'm totally disabled from my diaphragm down and partially in my right arm. And I've always been using wheelchairs and everything else. And I've been extremely fortunate. I've never been discriminated against. And a very good example of this was my boss at British Steel, who in fact worked for Lazard Frères at one stage in New York, Ian McGregor. And he was meeting in his house. I went to his house to meet him one day, and up in Scotland, a bit away from where you're going. He turned around to me, he said, "John, can you run upstairs and get those papers that we had yesterday?" And I went, I'd love to, Ian. Slight problem. Yeah, wheelchairs don't go upstairs. Well, there are some that will, but that is the true sign of people looking at the ability, not the disability. They're seeing the person, not the wheelchair, not the crutches, not the way that some people with CP have to walk or get around or anything else. Not the fact that they can't read the words in the right order, and going on with dyslexia and such. Like, look at some of the greatest actors that are around. They're all dyslexic. Susanna York and a lot of the other ones, the film stars, have got dyslexia. They're being recognized for their ability, their talent, not their disability.
And John, that's fairly amazing for you, because in 1949, that was not happening in the U.S. Even when I started school in the early, in the 70s, it was not happening. It was separate classrooms. It was very much a segregated learning environment. We were in the 40s. That's phenomenal to me. I mean, I heard a story yesterday or the day before. I have a 24-year-old with Down syndrome, and somebody told me that their mom, they had a sister who was born in 1965, and their mom actually had to go to court to bring her sister home with her to the house instead of going to an institution. So that's pretty amazing. Anita, any thoughts from you on this subject?
Yeah, so with the pandemic, what happened was, because I usually work with children and teachers, so I don't interface directly with adults who have dyslexia. And by the way, we've not identified a lot of adults who have dyslexia. Even they themselves don't even know they have the condition, because again, it is just newly found. So during the pandemic, what I discovered was I got a lot of people walking into the center when we had the off days of opening, and people were asking, these were basically the questions. I had problems reading, but now it is more profound, because even when I reach out to my coworkers, they are not able to help me. So because of that lack of physical interface, these people began to realize how deep their problems was. And at some point, I have to be the one to say, let's give you an assessment to see it could be something. And then we always find that it is, yes, dyslexia. And that would be their first knowledge about their condition. So some would take it, some wouldn't, and it goes on like that. So it was much of a period of discovery for us. A lot of the people who came in, realize that, well, this is what I have. This is a condition. Because most of them will tell you that they went through school, they found a way around school. Peers helped them. They went to cry and teachers supported them and all of that. So they went through school that way and didn't figure it out until the pandemic. And then some of them would even say they are unable to operate their phones and things like that. So that was why they came into the center, because we boldly have it at our door. If you have problems with learning, you have problems with reading, speak to us. So, it hits them and then they will just walk in. So those are the things that we found out during the pandemic.
Yeah, we definitely here in the US, has found that what was amusing to me is they would say, well, we're just going to do it online. Like, okay, you understand that some of these people can't even access technology or don't even have technology. In my region, we're a very rural district. So the internet connections are terrible. So they couldn't just jump on. I mean, even for my son, he will do a one-on-one Zoom meeting, but he will not do a meeting like this with multiple faces and all that sensory happening. It's way too much for him. So that tech divide also was an issue. I mean, it seems great to be like, oh, we're just gonna do everything online. What we did find though, in the program that we run a high school program, is we were able to connect kids from different high schools who were never, exposed outside of their little communities. So that was really great to have them meet kids from other areas. And some of them now do game nights and stuff on their own that are more tech savvy. And for parents, it also allowed parents to attend meetings. So because parents a lot of times can't attend meetings at night or even during the day because they're caring for these children and don't have supports, because the other thing in the US that's happening right now is we have a huge worker shortage. And so we cannot get workers to do one-on-one personal aid or even respite or even job supports. All of us who do job supports are struggling to find staff. John, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, one of the things which actually has helped matters, the pandemic did a lot of damage, but one of the other things which has helped matters is where we can find role models. And we get role models. Now, you've got people like using the dyslexia, if I may, in your area as a prime example. You actually go along, look at what some people consider to be the greatest James Bond ever, Sean Connery, dyslexic. Polio people, you've got people like Alan Alda from MASH. And you go further down. I was fortunate. The school that I went to, the headmaster got polio during the Second World War, serving in the North African desert. I was the only disabled child or child with a disability there. But you've got those, and if people have got to look outside and see outside, that's what people aren't doing. And you get people with visual impairments. My nephew is a severe CP, a very severe CP, and he is now working for the government in the UK and is heading up a department in the Department of Work and Pensions in running the employment services, not for people with disabilities, but for everybody in the southwest of England. So once again, they've taken him and they're using him, and he is the role model, and it goes in from there. And it's just working that way. If you can get those sorts of things, and people will recognize, if you can break the barriers down, the absolute barriers that there are as to what happens and how they should go on and what they should do. And I think one of the other questions you asked in there, what was the greatest achievement? My greatest achievement was getting Remy to go through university, getting everything done, and him flying it out the other end, coming out with a first degree, and then getting into a prime government job. As far as I'm concerned, job done.
That's awesome. Nilesh, you want to add?
Yeah, actually, I want to go back to what John was saying about Sean Connery and the other actors. See, the thing is, after they have established themselves as actors and stars and superstars, they have come out as person with disabilities, whatever their disabilities. Like especially the ones that are invisible. But at the same time, actors with disabilities or who kind of say that they have dyslexia or some disability, they find it very difficult to find their footings. So when we kind of take them as role model examples, I would be a little wary, because when they were kind of struggling or doing work, they had never come out as people with disabilities. So they did it. They kind of hid their disabilities from the world, saying that no, I'm not disabled. I'm regular as anybody you are. So especially Tom Cruise. Later on he kind of said that he was dyslexic. And even in India, we have a lot of actors who have now they're saying that they had dyslexia or have mental issues. Depression and things like that. So that is one thing I would like to say. Thank you.
But if you
So
you go,
I just wanted to address something in the chat real quick, John, before you go there. Emmy asked the questions that she was looking for, the questions that the panelists were given. We were actually going to go through those one by one, and we've sort of jumped around. Basically, I had asked them, what was the biggest challenge that you face in your work? What is the biggest myth that they've had to correct? And then what's the greatest achievement in this field? And then the question that you already heard is what advice for businesses? You're asking about outcomes, action steps, or takeaways expected from the session. I think it's we're just looking for that awareness. Maybe there's something that they've accomplished that you can take away to use in your work. Maybe there's just a different perspective that you hadn't heard before. We do not have a set for an exact, this is something specific. It's more just a discussion. But you have your hand up, so did I answer that, or did you have something else you wanted to add?
Thanks so much. It's M, by the way. You did answer those questions, but because I think one of the things that Nilesh said when he referred to the actors and their popularity and their coming out, I think what's really significant about that is one of the things, like when I talk about action steps and outcomes, a lot of what I'm hearing from the conversations is that, people need tangible ways that they can go back to their organizations to help implement change, right? Because we're all in these sessions because we're all involved in some level of disability advocacy or awareness already, or want to learn more about it. But we also want to come away from this, not only hearing other people's stories, but thinking about how can you as an individual do something in your community or in your organization to, further make change, even if it's a small step. And, so for me, one of the comments about the actors, I think it's great that they've come out as role models. But what I get from that really personally is that, a lot of time people with disabilities, especially invisible disabilities, they don't have the opportunity to say anything until they reach a certain level that they can then use their voice, right? So that's a huge, because I'm someone with invisible disabilities, but I use my voice because I can. So, but it's sort of like, but you walk that fine line of when can you cross that? And so I think like one of the things that we need to think about is how to remove the barriers in general so that, you don't have to push and push and push and hopefully get to a point where you can then talk about things. To make it more awareness and ways to do that within your community, with your organization, which is also, as an attorney, I can say this, which can also help affect legislative change in certain areas. The more people are aware of things and the more that happens. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks for all of that and for jumping in. I think, for me, so my promise to my guy in the first 2 days we were in the hospital was that we were going to change the way people think about Down syndrome, right? And I literally changed careers to do that. I had a very successful business career and I walked away from the money because I was so frustrated that people didn't get it. And I'll give you this takeaway that I actually just used at a conference this week is that words matter. Words matter for those of us who are doing this work. That when we say to a business, could you help this person, blah, 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 versus I go in and say, I have this amazing person that I'm either going to put to work in your company or your competitor. And I'm giving you this opportunity to have this amazing person work for you, right? And so, and if I get that vibe that they're just not going to get it, I'll move on to someone else who does get it. And then I'll blast that success story everywhere, right? So I think for people with the invisible disabilities, it's really giving them that permission and that bravery to be able to say, it's okay to tell us what you're doing. One of my staff, she's on the LGBTQ panel today. She's very open about her dyslexia with her students. She works with our high school kids, and she calls it her superpower because she tells everyone that if she wasn't dyslexic, she wouldn't look at things the way she does, and that wouldn't have led her to this job that she's doing, and right? But when you have, I think when you have, this is my own personal opinion, not necessarily that of the management, right, is that when you have a physical disability, it's even harder because people immediately snap that judgment. I was on with Keith Jones yesterday, who's a person with cerebral palsy that told this insane story about how he went to get a job as a teacher. He had been a successful teacher, and the guy literally picked up the phone and called his HR department and said, I have a severely handicapped gentleman here that wants to work as a teacher, and I don't know how we can keep him safe. And he was like, I was just sitting there like, what? I have children at home. They run around me. Let me worry about that. Know that I'm a good teacher first. And with my son with Down syndrome, this summer, he was hired by the Red Sox organization's farm team, which is local to us, to be a fan photographer. So he went around with his camera, took pictures of all the fans. He's phenomenal. One of his friends was putting together a recap of his photos for the end of the season that they wanted to highlight on their Instagram account. And he texted me and said, hey, Paula, I hadn't seen his pictures before, and I am blown away at his talent. To which I texted back, no kidding, I've been telling you that all season. And he was like, I feel terrible. And in his words, he said, I'd have thrown an elbow if I had known how good he was to get his pictures seen more. And it was like, it was great because he's like, and now I know, and now I'm throwing. That was his comment. But it's like, I've been telling you that, like, look at his work. Don't look at him, look at his work and know that he is a valuable member of this team. And they treated him great. Everybody treated him as a full member of the team. He had an incredible experience, but we're still fighting that hurdle of like, oh, isn't he cute? It's like, no, he's 24 years old. He's a really talented photographer, and let him just do his work and let it speak for itself. And when we did his interview, that's what I did. I did a visual resume that had his photos that he had taken at other candid events, and just handed that to them. And it was like, we wanted you to see kind of who he is and what his work is. And the minute they flipped through them, they were like, okay, when can he start working for us? So I think it's up to us to, again, really go in with that attitude of walking the walk that we want them to. We can't expect them to treat people equally if we're asking for help or asking for permission for this person to work versus presenting them like you would any other candidate. That said, we know that we're gonna, that's not always gonna be easy, right? And so it's like, to me, it's always a catch-22. Like, I feel bad for that person with autism that just comes in, and when you see them, you don't get it right away until maybe a little bit further into the conversation. But also for the people who have that, it's all over them, right? When you see them, what the disability is, it's equally hard. Anita, what's your thought on that? Because you're working with folks that are dyslexic all the time. Where do you see that, and how do you deal with that?
Well, with us, our major problem is actually parents. Parents are actually, having difficulty in accepting these things. And because it's always like one in a lot of the children, you find out that that child is being picked on. Allow me to use that word. Of acceptance is one of our major concerns. And then on the way forward, I think teachers they are an incredible resource. I don't know about other parts of the world, but in my part of the world, a teacher's word it's gold. You know, children come home and argue with their parents. My teacher said they believe that teachers are one of our go-to people, where we could teach them how to work with children with all kinds of disabilities. Children that have cerebral palsy, children that have autism, children that are blind. There's a way to work with them. Children that have hearing impairment, there's a way to work with them. So teachers need to understand these things. Teachers, for me, and that's one of the things that we are trying to work on, is to look at our community and say, okay, so how does Rotary come in? Rotary clubs can adopt schools and then train the teachers on how to support the children with all kinds of disabilities. We're just talking about disability. There are certain things that in my part of the world, children are not allowed to feel trauma. You know, children, you can't be a child and say that you're going through trauma. Why? How? How did you get to that point? So I had children that were going, their parents went through divorce, and then it was affecting the child. I had this little baby that comes to school and cried the entire day. So it got to a point I was really tired. And when he comes to school, he's crying and he's screaming, he wants his mother. Then one day I just said, I'm your mother. And then he stopped and looked at me. Actually, then he stopped crying and walked into the school. So it was a temporary relief because of that, I have to be at the gate all the time, every morning to welcome him. So it was not an effective way to relieve it. But when we had the conversation with his mother, and then I spoke to her, and then she realized the problem. She took him in because she was not supposed to reach out to him. So she took him to her house, and he comes to school from her house. So that stabilized him. It did him real good. And that's why I believe teachers are the go-to people in working with children, in working in solving the problem of disabilities. Teachers should educate the entire community. Because when we start from there, then workplaces will identify, workplaces will not be able to find a resource in these schools to say, okay, you said we should work with them, then how do we work with them? Because if educators cannot work with people with disabilities, how do other people do it? How? Because educators should educate most of the community.
John, it sounds like you had some great educators. What's your comments to M's question?
I think, yes, I did have some great educators, but can I just address something a bit broader on the education front? 15 years ago in the UK, a report came out which said the biggest inhibitors for children with disabilities was the expectation for them to fail by the teaching authorities and the teachers. And that came straight the way through. That actually spurred people into action, and we actually got to work, and we actually landed up having to run disability inclusion, disability awareness training at very basic levels to say to the teachers, look, the child may have this or it may have that, but they are still there. They have got talents. There are things there. Put it back into your own terms. Would you believe that through that disability awareness training, going through to actually bring people up to their own levels, their own standards, in the UK, they now have people with Down syndrome who have driving licenses. Yeah, it's and it took a long time to do it, but it's got there. But it's actually
my guy would love that. He's been dying to drive, and we're like, I don't know, that's a good idea. I'm gonna say impulse control.
But the other one has been that it goes through, and in diverse societies, it is very difficult to look at it. You actually have to look at cultural differences as well. Now, in the UK, it's a real melting pot because it had an empire. So you go through and you've got all these people coming in, and there are differences where people expect them to fail, the children to fail. And that actually happens in Ireland as well. And that happens in Ireland. We were doing some work about 2 years ago, and we suddenly discovered that there were 2 children in the local town who were being hidden away because they were CP, but their parents thought it was a disgrace that they had this happening to them. And there are, when I say cultural differences, I don't want to be diversive, but there was a situation where in some cultures and in some religions, you get the sins of the parents being visited on the children, and so through their disabilities. My father actually had a sergeant major who thumped the chaplain, and he got up on charges for it because when the child was born, he was CP, and the chaplain turned around to the mother and said, "It's your fault, it's your sins which have caused this, it's God's will." I'm afraid the sergeant major actually got hold of him and threw the chaplain out, the padre out through the doors. He didn't get charged in the end, but it's those differences as well which you've got to look at, and you go through. You look at them. You've got to educate the parents as to what's going on. My niece is dyslexic. We've got a fair bit in our family which goes on, apart from the nephew who's got CP. So she is now a consultant radiologist because her parents could see what her potential was and took the time and the trouble to actually develop her and to get through and to go out and find what she needed, even in the way of going out to find things like Franklin's Dictionary, which goes onto a computer, which sorts out dyslexia spelling. So, but you've got to educate, and the education, it's not just a bottom-up education, it's a top-down as well. You've got to meet in the middle, and the child is the one in the middle who's got to be developed and allowed to develop their potential. Every child has a huge potential.
I think in the U.S., that's the part of the challenge for us, is that all of the way that the plans are written it's called an IEP, an individualized education plan, but the plan focuses on everything they can't do, right? So, yes. So by the time they hit 22, this kid's heard everything they can't do. And so when we get them in the transition services and then as adults, the first thing we have to do is deprogram both the student and the parent. Okay, I got all that. I heard all the stuff he can't do. But what I'm not hearing is all the stuff he can do, right? So let's start to observe things that they do, skills that they have, and then let's figure out how does that equate to work. Our guys that are autistic are typically fabulous quality control managers, right? Because the world for them is black or white. There's no gray. And for a quality control person, that's the best person you could have. They are not going to work in customer service. So no, we are not going to have them do customer service. My guy with Down syndrome hates to clean, and they're like, well, let's have him clean the tables. I'm like, you could, but I wouldn't eat off that table. I mean, I would look at the talent that he has. And sometimes I think it really is that those teachers are so focused on trying to build those skills that they don't have, that they miss what that, as Tamara from my staff would say, is their disability superpower. Like, what is the thing that they do? The kids with Down syndrome, and that's overgeneralized, but they are super empathetic. They bring this unbridled joy most of the time. Not all. They have, they are basically a chromosomal addition to my chromosome map, right? So they're all very different, but there are definitely some similarities. So I think, really exactly that. It's education, teaching, and sometimes for parents. What I always tell my staff as well is when you are looking at the adult services, you are on the backs of all those other people that disappointed them till they got to you. So you have to work through that disappointment and prove to them that you are really going to do what you say you're going to do. You really are going to move them to the next level, and you are not going to give up on them because they have already seen that time and time again. Nilesh, go ahead.
Yeah, getting to the point you were talking about, this IEP. We don't have that system in India. But recently I was, called to be an observer for a training program that was conducted for teachers. and and the classroom also. Where the teachers were teaching in the classroom. And one of the things that I kind of gave in my report was that that the teachers had that. Ableism was kind of entrenched in their DNA, and even though they were trying to kind of say the right things, but unfortunately, they were not going beyond that. So, one of the recommendations that I gave them was to read a book on books on disability studies. Nowadays disability studies is a huge, thing going on in a lot of universities. In fact, I was part of the Disability Studies Center at Nalsar. The university that you mentioned. So I kind of headed the unit there for some time. So I think, it was good to kind of expose teachers to the new ideas that are coming in. And we are still, unfortunately, in India, whatever the Brits do, they hand over to us, we still kind of continue. Unfortunately, we've never gone beyond that. So some years back, some Brits had come to India and they talk about social model of disability. And they're still talking about social model of disability, and people have moved on. Social model of disability has its own problems. And disability is a medical issue. You cannot really go beyond that. Social model says that everything is so the society is at fault. So John was saying, we have to meet somewhere in the middle. So the whole ICF thing that speaks about various things. So I kind of exposed to them, and there was a lot of resistance. We were only wanting to do that. I said, if you were my teacher, I would have had a lot of problems with you. The way they would see. Unfortunately, like John, I had very good teachers, and I was a teacher. I was a student even before special education was a buzzword. So I had teachers that actually taught at regular schools. Though I went to a special school, teachers, when were teaching at regular schools, they had no inkling of what special education was all about. They only understood that this student is different, and we need to kind of see how we can get him at par with other students. That was the thing they had, and I was exposed to books at very early age. By the time I was 10, I had already read Plato. And some other Aristotle and things like that. So they kind of knew exactly how to look at each individual students and give them the best they could. So I think that is missing in regular schools nowadays. Even special education. So I think disability studies, I think we have to emphasize. Not that go at to the university level where they kind of again, talk about theories and things like that, which actually doesn't make sense to the regular people. Theory, it's in its good state, but practically has no value. So I think we really need to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, in my town, even they had when they do the professional development day, regular ed teachers go one way, the special ed department goes another way. I'm like, someone explain that to me. Like, why are the regular ed teachers not getting the disability training? Because they're never going to be able to do it. And what I found for us is that they would say, well, he doesn't need to know that. Like, yeah, he kind of does. He kind of does. And he doesn't need to know some Mesopotamia. I don't care if he knows that, but I do care that he's with his peers when we're talking about English or math or subjects that he needs to know.
Oh, add to that, the physiotherapists and occupational therapists, they kind of give you a completely different, thing. In fact, when we were children, we used to call the therapist the rapist. If you look at the spelling, therapists. So we used to call them that because they used to make us go through a lot of pain and things. So that was a joke between me and my disabled friend.
Does anybody else that's listening have some questions? We have about 18 minutes left, so I just want to make sure we if anybody's got a question, you can just unmute and ask it. I'm not seeing everybody right now, so I'm going to change my view so I can see you all. Does anybody have any questions or any comments, or anyone tuning in from a place? Haris, is that how you pronounce it? Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible? Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am, for giving the opportunity. I had a question from the panelists. As far as my background is concerned, I am Haris Iqbal from Pakistan and doing B.Ed honors in special education. I am a student and I am very eager to work. Not only my fields required it, but it's on my own interest that I want to work for the disabled people um, all over the world or mostly in Pakistan. I wanted to ask that being a student and being at this level, what are the responsibilities that you might think that I can contribute towards? Thank you, ma'am.
Panelists, anyone want to take that?
Everyone.
I'm Nilesh. Sorry, John, carry on.
Okay, you go on first.
Yes, Harris, I'm from India, and India is not very different from Pakistan in many ways. So one of the things I would like to tell you is wear your disability on your sleeve and just go out and talk about disability. Try to keep it as cross disability as possible. Wherever you can raise your voice and see that whatever difference you can make and get as many people with disabilities involved, create your own group that could make a lot of difference. Just keeping it short. Thank you.
I'd
Thank you,
endorse
sir.
that. I'd endorse that as well. And I'd turn around and say everybody has a contribution to make, but the main thing as well is to remember that when you're doing it, to advocate for yourself. To advocate for yourself, and when you advocate for yourself, you advocate for others as well. So if you've got your disability and as said, wear it on your sleeve, fine, that's no problem. But you also make sure you get what you want and to allow you to do what you want to do so that you can actually develop yourself and allow yourself to be a valued and valuable member of society, one which people look up to.
Mr. John, I want to clarify that I don't have any kind of disability.
Oh, right.
Yes, and I want to,
I think we lost him for a second.
hello.
Yep, go ahead.
Am
We
I
got you back.
audible?
Great.
I was saying as Mr. Nalish, as he said that yes, India is not very much different from Pakistan. They are both like same. I want to clarify that there's very much work to do in Pakistan. People don't understand disability. They are not aware of the rights they can get for their disabled children or whatever, and they think that their disabled children are such kind of a shame and they hide it from the society.
Yes. Yeah. Paula, can I just reply to that very quickly? The thing about it is that is why Rotary has got advocacy. I can never get the words out. Why they have groups which advocate for others. They've started one up recently, which I'm involved with, which is about polio, post-polio syndrome advocacy group. But not all the people in that group are polio. They're not all disabled. They're not all this. They're not all that. But you and everybody in society can always advocate for others as well as for yourself. You can spot to see what's wrong. You can do things. You can actually make society better. And that's one of the purposes of Rotary, is to actually help and make society better. And it does it very well. 1.4 million members of Rotary, and you go through and you do that, and you can make an awful lot of noise in those 200 countries.
I'm going to jump to Tamara because she's been quiet for way too long, and I know her too well to know that she's jumping right now. So go ahead, but then after Tamara, I'd like to ask Anita, and I'm not sure if John or Nilesh, if you're also on the International Rotary World Disability Advocacy Club, which is a mouthful, because I hadn't even heard of that club until this week. So we're going to go to Tam, and then I'd like to get for you to tell us a little bit more about what that group does and what kind of power we can wrangle out of that group.
I just wanted to respond to what you were asking about, and from someone with a disability and working with the disabled population, if you're looking to educate yourself on how you can help people with disabilities, my biggest thing would be learning how to relate to them on their level. So figuring out what their learning styles are and how they take information in, because if you can teach that individual those things, and understanding as someone with a disability and not realizing that, wait a minute, what I'm thinking and how I'm thinking isn't wrong, it's different. And I know that now at 53 years old, but I did not know that my entire life. So having that understanding and being able to relay that to your students, if that's the population that you want to work with, that's vital to figure out where they're at and point out that this isn't just a disability, it's a different ability. And I know it's wording, but for me, that's vital, because I would not have the job I have now if I did not have my disability. So to me, that's a disability superpower. That's it. Off my soapbox.
All right, can one of you tell me about the International Rotary World Disability Advocacy Club? Anita, I know that that you are the secretary. Can you tell us a little bit more about what does that group do, and how can the rest of us get some power out of that, or help educate members of the community at large, other business owners?
Okay, so the Advocacy Club is we are an e-club that's first all over the world. And what we do is we talk about how each person is advocating about disabilities in their own communities. And then we come together to also look at proposals from each member to see how the club and how Rotary generally can support the club members. So one of the conversations that we had during one of our club meetings, club general meeting, was they saw the need that teachers are actually champions of advocacy. And a lot of the members on that group had one thing to say about gaining support from a teacher, or also gaining support from their parent. But we all came to the conclusion that for us to be able to make more impact, we need to educate the educators. So we are planning on doing a global educators summit where we would speak to teachers, maybe through webinars or even seminars, physical meetings, to see how teachers can take on this advocacy, to see how schools can be the go-to area where this advocacy can be championed. And then also to see not just about educating children or people with disabilities, but also to be able to see if policies can be changed. Because if policies need to be changed, somebody needs to champion that. And if whoever wants to champion the change of policy needs to be properly equipped. They need to know what it is the people that are living with the condition want to gain, and what it is that can support them effectively in having living their normal lives. So these are the things that we do at the club. And our meetings, we have club meetings on Mondays. It's always a virtual meeting. Then the club also has a group of friends where we invite everybody to come along and support our projects or make contributions to our projects, and then to make contributions generally to advocacy.
That's great. So we have about 7 minutes left. So panelists, final thoughts.
Ooh. The final thoughts. The task is not insurmountable. It can be done. It can, people, if you turn around and say you're never going to do it, you never will. The education needs to be done, and you have the perfect tool for going out into the world and through the Rotary clubs. Many of the Rotary clubs have got teachers in them, and they've also got other people. They've got leaders of industry in them. And you can, if you can educate and go through those sorts of people, you can do a great deal of good. It is not going to happen overnight. Where we've got to now has taken 50, 60 years. I'm 74 now. It'll never be finished in my lifetime. There will be far more to do than I can achieve. But the only thing you can do is to keep on going away. There's an old expression which says, it's lovely when you stop hitting your head off a brick wall. I think I'm still going to have lumps on my head when they put me into a box. But don't give up. And the other one that was said was about how to communicate and how to talk to people. And the lady turned around and said, you're in a situation where if I hadn't had my disability, I wouldn't have been doing what I'm doing now. Well, there's some very good examples of that. At the moment, the most publicized environmental change activist has Asperger's or autism, Greta Thunberg. And she says that if she hadn't got that, she wouldn't be able to do what she does. And she is using her disability to her advantage. And I think sometimes I probably use mine to my advantage, to get the point over, where you get people sort of looking down on you. But the other thing about it is, teach people how to approach disabled persons. You don't have to go up to a deaf person and start shouting at them. You don't grab somebody who's got a visual impairment and steer them across the thing. The other thing which I get at, you go around in a wheelchair, and the next thing is you're in a social gathering and everybody's over the top of you. Well, I've got around that one these days. I've now got a wheelchair which goes up in the air. So, you can do that sort of thing. But, teach them how to do it. Everybody's got to be on a level playing field. Now, that level playing field may be that somebody is going to have to come down to your level in a wheelchair. It's going to have to learn. But there's also another side to it, which is you've got to teach the disability communities how to react to society. There is a very famous example with the deaf community in the UK, where they went to there was a conference which was being totally signed, and when it came to the breakout or the coffee session, people were trying to ask questions of the people who had hearing were trying to ask questions, those who were participating, and people from the deaf community were turning around and saying, we're not talking to you. You don't talk our language. You can't do sign language. We're not talking to you. So there is another side to it as well. There's two sides. And the other thing that's got to be taught as well to people is people with disabilities demand rights. With rights come responsibilities. And you have got to put the two together. They're not separate boxes miles apart. They all come together in one cohesion.
Good, great points, great points. Anita? Final thought?
Hello, okay, yes. Final thoughts. This is actually an incredible thing we're doing, and advocacy can never end, because in as much as we are creating awareness, there are more things that are coming up on every aspect of things. Sometimes you might think that you have people have good knowledge of what the condition is, but then with time you now realize that there are other factors coming in that need to be addressed. So I would say that advocacy should continue in our homes, in our places of work, and personally we should take it upon ourselves to speak to the next person about the rights and also the things that will make people with disability feel comfortable in our societies.
Excellent. Yeah, I would add to that on both sides, this DEI work is tough in every category. And it's also, understanding that people are learning and being tolerant of those mistakes, right? Correct them when they're wrong, but don't be rude about it. That the deaf community is long known for that, of wanting to be their own group. We have a huge deaf unit in our company, and they very much are, this is what we do and this is how we speak, and that's great. But then provide an interpreter so I can talk to you, because I do want to talk to you, and I'm trying to learn sign language. I'm probably going to mess it up, but I'm trying, but I'm slow. Like, if you say something to me, I can do it, but I'm going to be really slow. So you got to slow down for me. Nilesh, we've got about 2 minutes.
So actually less than a minute, 2 minutes. Two things I would like to say. One is that, I'm also part of the group, the international group Ken has started. And the thing is, a lot of good work is happening around the world on disabilities. And ultimately, the way the disability sector works is that, everybody is an island of excellency where there's nothing that connects them. I think there's a lot that they can learn from each other rather than reinvent the wheel. And second thing I would like to say is, as a person who's been working on law for a long time, law can be law. They say is an ass. I am using the British spelling, not the American way of saying it. And ass is a beast of burden. The only way you can change the system is to use the system against itself. Whatever your country has, law is there. Use it as much as possible. Advocate, do a lot of advocacy, maybe go to court, or do a lot of things. I think it works. And in India, like one of the questions you had, what has been our thing? We've got a very good law now. 1995 there was an act that was terrible, but the new act that has come is a very good law that's based on the CRPD, and that is helping us to get a lot of people with disabilities go into employment. And one of the things that has come through the law is that every company with at least minimum 10 employees, they should have a policy on disability. And and that is something that is happening. Companies are not coming forward, but that is there in law, so we can use that. And yes, I think we've run out of time.
We are out